12-year-old Michael Torres had always been different from other kids in the small town of Cedar Hills. While his classmates complained about their father's strict rules or absent work schedules, Michael lived in the shadow of a man everyone revered but no one truly understood. Father Thomas McKenna had been the parish priest for over 15 years, beloved by the community for his gentle sermons and tireless work with troubled youth. The boy had grown up in the rectory alongside the priest, told by everyone that Father McKenna was his adoptive father, who had taken him in as an infant when his parents died in a car accident. It was a story that had satisfied Michael's curiosity for years, but as he entered adolescence, doubts began to gnaw at him. He looked nothing like the priest, shared none of his mannerisms, and most troubling of all, he had started having vivid dreams about a woman with kind eyes who sang lullabies in Spanish. The breaking point came during a particularly heated argument about Michael's poor grades. In a moment of teenage rebellion and frustration, Michael shouted words that would shatter their carefully constructed world. "You're not even my real father. I don't have to listen to you." Father McKenna's face went pale, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the kitchen table. "Michael, we've talked about this," the priest said quietly, his voice strained with an emotion the boy couldn't identify. "I may not be your biological father, but I've raised you since you were 6 months old. That makes me your father in every way that matters." But Michael had seen something flicker across the priest's face, a look of fear, or perhaps guilt, that planted the first seeds of suspicion in his young mind. That night, as Father McKenna prayed alone in the church, he wrestled with a secret he had carried for over a decade. The truth about Michael's parentage was far more complicated than anyone in their small community could imagine, and he knew that someday, the carefully constructed lies would crumble, threatening to destroy everything he had built to protect the boy he loved as his own son. The following weeks were marked by an uncomfortable tension between Michael and Father McKenna. The boy began paying closer attention to their daily interactions, searching for clues about his true identity. He noticed how the priest sometimes received mysterious phone calls that he would take in private, speaking in hushed tones before quickly ending the conversation when Michael approached. Michael started exploring the rectory more thoroughly, looking through old photo albums and documents. Most of the pictures showed Father McKenna's ordination, various church events, and Michael's own childhood milestones, but there were no photos of his supposed deceased parents. When he asked about them, Father McKenna would provide vague answers about the accident and change the subject, claiming it was too painful to discuss. The boy's suspicions deepened when he overheard Mrs. Rodriguez, the church secretary, talking to her sister on the phone. "That boy looks more like Father McKenna every day," she had said, not knowing Michael was listening from the hallway. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin." It's remarkable how adopted children sometimes grow to resemble their guardians. But Michael knew there was something in her tone that suggested she believed more than simple mimicry was at work. During confession, other parishioners would sometimes make comments about how blessed Father McKenna was to have such a devoted son, and how the boy was clearly following in his father's faithful footsteps. These remarks always seemed to make the priest uncomfortable, and Michael began to wonder why expressions of familial love caused Father McKenna such visible distress. The turning point came when Michael discovered a locked drawer in Father McKenna's desk. His curiosity overwhelming his respect for privacy, he managed to pick the simple lock using a paperclip. Inside, he found a birth certificate with his name on it, but the document raised more questions than it answered. The father's name was listed as unknown, and the mother's name was Maria Elena Torres, a name that meant nothing to him but felt strangely familiar, like a half-remembered dream. Block 3. The birth certificate discovery. Michael stared at the birth certificate with trembling hands, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. According to the document, he had been born at St. Mary's Hospital in the neighboring city of San Rafael, not in Cedar Hills as he had always been told. The mother's name, Maria Elena Torres, was written in elegant script, but there was no information about her beyond her age at the time of his birth, 19 years old. What disturbed Michael most was the date discrepancy. According to Father McKenna's story, Michael's parents had died in a car accident when he was 6 months old, and the priest had taken him in immediately afterward. But the birth certificate was dated only 12 years ago, which meant either the priest's story was wrong, or this wasn't the only document that had been altered or hidden. He photographed the certificate with his phone and carefully returned it to the drawer, his mind churning with questions. Who was Maria Elena Torres? If she was his mother, what had really happened to her? And why had Father McKenna felt the need to create such an elaborate story about deceased parents and a car accident that may never have occurred? That evening at dinner, Michael found himself studying Father McKenna's face more intently than ever before. Now that Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned their resemblance, he could see similarities he had never noticed before. They both had the same deep brown eyes, the same way of tilting their head when thinking, and the same habit of drumming their fingers when nervous. "Father McKenna," Michael said carefully, testing the waters. "What was my mother's name?" The priest froze with his fork halfway to his mouth, a piece of pot roast balanced precariously on the utensil. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. "Your mother's name was Sarah," Father McKenna replied finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Thompson. She was a wonderful woman who loved you very much." But Michael caught the slight hesitation before the answer, and he knew with growing certainty that Father McKenna was lying to him about something fundamental about his own identity. Block 4. The internet search. Unable to sleep, Michael spent hours that night researching on his phone. He searched for any records of a car accident involving Sarah and James Thompson, the names Father McKenna had given him as his deceased parents. Despite trying various combinations of dates, locations, and circumstances, he found no obituaries, newspaper articles, or accident reports that matched the story he had been told his entire life. Next, he searched for Maria Elena Torres, starting with San Rafael and expanding his search to surrounding areas. What he found made his heart race with a mixture of excitement and fear. There was a Maria Elena Torres who had been reported missing from San Rafael 12 years ago, just months after Michael's birth date. The missing person report included a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the same woman from his dreams. The report stated that 19-year-old Maria Torres had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind no family except for an infant son. The case had gone cold after several months of investigation, with police finding no evidence of foul play, but also no indication that she had left voluntarily. Reading the details, Michael felt a chill run down his spine, as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed began falling into place. He found additional information about Maria through social media posts from friends who had never stopped hoping for her return. They described her as a devoted single mother who had been struggling financially but was determined to provide for her baby. Several posts mentioned her strong Catholic faith and how she had been attending Mass regularly at various churches in the area, seeking guidance and support during a difficult time in her life. The most shocking discovery came when he found a blog post from one of Maria's friends, written on the anniversary of her disappearance. The post mentioned that Maria had been receiving help from a young priest who had been counseling her about her difficult situation. The priest's name wasn't mentioned, but the friend wrote about how grateful Maria had been for his support and guidance during her darkest hours. Michael's hands shook as he put down his phone. The pieces were starting to form a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to see, but he knew he couldn't stop now. Whatever the truth was about his parentage and Maria Torres's disappearance, Father McKenna held the key to answers that Michael desperately needed. Block 5. Confronting the truth. The next morning, Michael could barely concentrate during his classes at the Catholic school attached to their parish. His teachers noticed his distraction, but he brushed off their concerns, claiming he was feeling under the weather. All he could think about was the missing person report and the photograph of Maria Torres, whose face seemed hauntingly familiar despite his claims of not remembering her. After school, he found Father McKenna in the church sanctuary, kneeling in prayer before the altar. The priest looked older than his 45 years, his shoulders bearing the weight of responsibilities that Michael was only beginning to understand. Taking a deep breath, Michael approached the altar and knelt beside the man who had raised him. "I know about Maria Torres," Michael said quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the empty church. Father McKenna's entire body went rigid, and for several long moments, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a chasm that 12 years of lies had created. "How?" Father McKenna finally asked, his voice barely audible. His hands were clasped so tightly in prayer that his knuckles had turned white, and Michael could see tears beginning to form in the priest's eyes. Michael pulled out his phone and showed Father McKenna the missing person report. "She was my real mother, wasn't she? And she didn't die in a car accident. She disappeared when I was a baby, and somehow I ended up with you." The priest looked at the phone screen and closed his eyes, as if seeing Maria's face again was physically painful. "Michael," Father McKenna said, turning to face the boy with tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "There are things about your past that I've kept from you to protect you, but I can see now that the truth was always going to find its way to the surface. Your mother, Maria. She was an extraordinary woman who loved you more than life itself." The priest's voice broke as he continued. "She came to me when she was desperate and scared, with nowhere else to turn. She was so young, so alone, and she was trying to do what she thought was best for you. But something happened. Something terrible. And I made a promise to her that I've been keeping ever since, even though it meant lying to you about your origins." Block 6, the painful confession. Father McKenna led Michael to his private office behind the altar, where they could speak without fear of being overheard. The room felt smaller than usual, filled with the weight of secrets that were finally ready to be revealed. The priest poured himself a glass of water with shaking hands and sat down across from the boy who had become the center of his world. "Your mother came to me when you were about 4 months old," Father McKenna began, his voice steadier now that he had decided to tell the truth. "She had been living in a women's shelter in San Rafael, trying to get back on her feet after some very difficult circumstances. She was barely surviving, working 2 jobs and struggling to care for you while dealing with threats from your biological father." Michael leaned forward, hanging on every threats. "Your biological father was a dangerous man, Mike. Maria had fled from an abusive relationship when she was pregnant with you, but he had been tracking her down, making her life a nightmare. She was terrified that he would find her and take you away, or worse." Father McKenna's hands trembled as he reached for a tissue. "She came to me because she had heard I worked with families in crisis situations." The priest continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "Maria was a remarkable young woman. Intelligent, kind, deeply faithful despite everything she had endured. She loved you so much, Michael, but she was convinced that as long as she remained in your life, you would both be in danger. She had been receiving increasingly violent threats, and the police seemed unable or unwilling to provide adequate protection." "What happened to her?" Michael asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. Father McKenna was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "She made a decision that broke both of our hearts. She decided that the only way to keep you safe was to disappear from your life completely. She asked me to take care of you, to raise you as if you were my own son, and to never tell you about her unless it became absolutely necessary for your safety or well-being." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. His mother hadn't abandoned him or been killed in an accident. She had sacrificed her own happiness and her relationship with her son to protect him from a threat he had never known existed. Block 7, the DNA test decision. "But that still doesn't explain why everyone says I look like you," Michael said, studying Father McKenna's face with new intensity. "Mrs. Rodriguez isn't the first person to comment on our resemblance. If you're not related to me, why do we look so similar?" Father McKenna's face went pale, and he looked away, unable to meet Michael's gaze. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity, and Michael could sense that they were approaching the heart of the mystery that had shaped his entire life. "There's something else, isn't there?" Michael pressed, his voice stronger now. "Something you still haven't told me." The priest stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the church grounds where Michael had played as a child. "Michael, there are some truths that are more complicated than they appear on the surface. Your mother, she never told me who your biological father was. She said it was better if I didn't know, for everyone's safety." "But you suspected something, didn't you?" Michael asked, pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicking into place in his mind. "That's why you've been so nervous whenever people comment on how much we look alike." Father McKenna turned back to face him, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. "I've wondered, yes. There were circumstances around the time when your mother would have conceived. But I've never wanted to know for certain because the implications would be—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Michael stood up, his young mind grappling with possibilities that seemed impossible to believe. "Father McKenna, I want to take a DNA test. We both do. Right now. Today." "Michael, please, think about what you're asking. Some truths can't be undone once they're revealed. Are you prepared for any possible outcome?" The boy looked at the man who had been his father in every way that mattered for 12 years, and despite his youth, his voice carried a maturity that surprised them both. I need to know the truth about who I am, and I think, deep down, you need to know it too. Whatever the results show, you'll still be my dad. But I can't keep living with these questions. After a long moment, Father McKenna nodded slowly. The truth, whatever it might be, was finally going to come to light. Walk 8. The test results. 3 days later, Father McKenna and Michael sat in the same office where they had shared their difficult conversation, waiting for the results of the expedited DNA test they had taken. The priest had barely slept since they had submitted their samples, and Michael had been unusually quiet, as if he was preparing himself for news that would change everything he thought he knew about his identity. The envelope arrived by courier at exactly 2 p.m., as promised by the testing company. Father McKenna signed for it with hands that trembled so violently he could barely write his name. Both of them stared at the sealed envelope for several minutes, knowing that once it was opened, there would be no going back to the comfortable uncertainty they had lived with for so long. "Do you want me to open it?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Father McKenna shook his head. "No, this is my responsibility." With deliberate care, he opened the envelope and pulled out the official document. His eyes scanned the technical jargon and statistics, but the conclusion was stated clearly at the bottom of the page in bold letters that seemed to leap off the paper. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. The document slipped from Father McKenna's nerveless fingers and fluttered to the floor. Michael picked it up and read the results for himself, his young mind struggling to process the magnitude of what they had just learned. The priest who had raised him, the man who had taken vows of celibacy and devoted his life to serving God, was his biological father. "How?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "How is this possible?" Father McKenna buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that came from the deepest part of his soul. "I was so young when I was ordained," he whispered through his tears. "So naive about the world and about myself. Your mother, Maria. She came to me when I was questioning everything about my vocation, about whether I truly belonged in the priesthood." The confession poured out of him like water through a broken dam. She was so beautiful, so full of life and faith despite everything she had endured. I was supposed to be counseling her, helping her find her way, but instead I fell in love with her. We both did something we knew was wrong, but it felt so right at the time. And then she discovered she was pregnant with you. Block 9. The full truth revealed. "She never told me she was carrying my child," Father McKenna continued, his voice hollow with years of suppressed guilt and grief. "When she left San Rafael, she just disappeared from my life. I convinced myself that she had found her way to a better situation. I threw myself into my work, trying to forget about her and the feelings I had experienced." Michael sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the image of the devout priest he had known his entire life with this revelation of human frailty and forbidden love. "But she came back," he said quietly. "She came back when you were 4 months old." Father McKenna nodded, tears still streaming down his face. "She was desperate, running from your biological father. Or at least, the man she had told everyone was your father to protect me. She had been living with the knowledge that I was really your father, but she had never intended to burden me with that truth." The priest looked up at Michael with eyes full of anger. "When she appeared at my door with you in her arms, I knew immediately. You looked exactly like I had as a baby. My mother had shown me photographs. But Maria was terrified that if anyone discovered the truth, it would destroy my career in the church and put all 3 of us in danger from the man she had been hiding from. So she decided to disappear again," Michael said, understanding beginning to dawn on him. "She said it was the only way to protect both of us. She would vanish completely, and I would raise you as an adopted child. No one would question a priest taking in an orphaned baby. It would be seen as an act of Christian charity. But Michael, you have to understand, giving you up nearly killed her. She loved you more than her own life." Father McKenna reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a letter, yellowed with age. "She left this for you, to be given to you when you turned 18, or if you ever started asking questions about your origins. I think it's time you read it." Michael took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing his mother's handwriting from the signature on his birth certificate. As he unfolded the paper, he could see stains where tears had fallen years ago, both his mother's and Father McKenna's. The letter began simply, "My dearest Michael, if you are reading this, then you have discovered the truth about who you really are, and you deserve to know how much you were loved." Dis Block 10, Maria's letter. Michael read his mother's letter aloud, his voice growing stronger as he connected with the woman who had made the ultimate sacrifice for his safety and well-being. "My dearest Michael, if you are reading this, then you have discovered the truth about who you really are, and you deserve to know how much you were loved from the very moment you came into this world. Your father, and yes, Thomas is your real father, in every sense that matters, is the most honorable man I have ever known. What happened between us was not a moment of weakness, but a moment of pure love that gave the world the most precious gift, you." The letter continued with Maria's explanation of her decision to leave, her hopes for Michael's future, and her faith that Father McKenna would be an extraordinary father, despite the unusual circumstances. She wrote about watching Michael sleep in his crib, memorizing every detail of his face so she could carry those memories with her forever. "I know that someday you will hate me for leaving you," the letter continued, "but I pray that when you are older, you will understand that everything I did was to give you the chance at a normal, safe life that you deserved. The man I told everyone was your father is dangerous, and as long as he believes you are his son, you will never be truly safe if I remain in your life." The most heartbreaking part of the letter was Maria's description of her last night with Michael. "I held you all night, singing the lullabies my grandmother had sung to me, trying to imprint the feeling of your heartbeat against mine so I would never forget. I told you about your father, your real father, and how much he would love you if he knew the truth. I promised you that even though I couldn't stay, there would always be someone who loved you completely." The letter ended with Maria's blessing, and her hope that Michael would grow up to be as good and kind as his father. She included details about her own family history, medical information that might be important as he grew older, and most importantly, her absolute certainty that leaving him with Father McKenna was the right decision. "Your father may never be able to acknowledge you publicly as his son," she wrote, "but I know he will love you and protect you with every fiber of his being. You are so lucky to have him, and he is so lucky to have you, even if the world can never know the full truth of your relationship." Block 11. A new understanding. After reading the letter, Michael and Father McKenna sat in silence for a long time, both processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. The DNA test had confirmed what Maria's letter had already made clear. They were truly father and son, bound together not just by love and circumstances, but by blood and an impossible choice made by a woman who had loved them both enough to sacrifice her own happiness. "Do you hate me?" Father McKenna asked finally, his voice barely audible. "For keeping this from you? For the choices I made that led to this situation?" Michael looked at the man who had raised him with infinite patience and love, who had attended every school play and baseball game, who had taught him to ride a bike and helped him with homework, and been there for every scraped knee and childhood nightmare. "No," he said firmly, "I could never hate you. You're my dad. You've always been my dad. This doesn't change that." The relief on Father McKenna's face was profound, but it was quickly replaced by worry. "Michael, you understand that this knowledge puts us both in a very difficult position. If the church hierarchy were to discover the truth about your parentage, it could mean the end of my career, possibly even excommunication, and more importantly, if the man your mother was running from ever finds out." "We'll figure it out," Michael said with a maturity that surprised them both. "Together. Like we always have." Over the following weeks, father and son worked together to understand the full implications of their situation. They researched the man Maria had been fleeing from, and discovered that he had died in a prison fight 3 years earlier, eliminating the immediate physical threat that had driven Maria's decision to disappear. They also began making discreet inquiries about Maria's whereabouts, hoping against hope that she might still be alive somewhere, living under a new identity and waiting for the day when it might be safe to return. Father McKenna contacted private investigators and missing persons organizations, using his connections in the church to access resources that might help them find her. The most important thing they discovered was that their love for each other hadn't changed. If anything, understanding the sacrifice that had brought them together made their bond even stronger. They began planning for Michael's future with the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as father and son, united by truth instead of separated by secrets. Thank you for listening to our story. If this touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories like this one. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful tales of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all.